story. And we sang it, and I just love to tell this story because I didn't have anything to do with it. What I want to do is, I'm first going to just show you some pictures, and then I'm going to tell the story, because I have a hard time coordinating what I say with what's on the screen. I just get all mixed up, and I don't want to do that. So if you could find that, oh, there it is. Okay. Now just stop here a moment. I guess I will talk of some of these pictures. This story about my trip to Sierra Leone, I can identify the beginning of it. I know when it started. It started with this young man, Jackson Lee. Jackson Lee was born in Liberia. He came to America and showed up in Austin, Texas as an illegal, as a young man.
He was much more handsome to his mother over here before he did the mustache and the beard.
Yeah, she's asked me to find a better picture, and I can't. So anyway, Jackson showed up at our church, Sunrise Community Church, Austin, Texas, in December of 1999. He came to live with us for many years. We became known as Mom and Dad. He was one of our children. We called him our foster son. So it begins with Jackson. Now, the next picture, I think, is another man. This is John Wah. John Wah was born and raised in Liberia also. Now, he's much older than Jackson. But John Wah, raised in Liberia, was forced to flee Liberia because of the Civil War. He fled to Sierra Leone, lived there for a number of years, got involved in some things that I told you this morning. He got involved with the Fulani pastor Jallo. It's this man and Jallo who started the church and the clinic, and both are in existence today, 30-some years later. So this is John Wah, and he's the guy who got me to go to Sierra Leone. The next picture, these are two other people from Sierra Leone, and the young man on the right, Abbas, he is an amazing young man. He just graduated last week from university, and he was with me a lot. And the young woman is Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth has adopted me and Aaron as her grandparents.
She sent me this dress.
Yes, that dress came from her. Now, the thing about Elizabeth was that John Wah had told me that you can't go where you want, you can't eat what you want, you can't drink what you want, you can't do what you want unless Elizabeth says okay. So Elizabeth would be the first person in the morning at my door. It was Elizabeth. She would be bringing my food, she had cooked my food, or she had bought my food. Wherever I went, Elizabeth was with me, and she had my food, and if we went out to eat, she determined it all. Wonderful young woman, just wonderful. Now those two would also, just one other thing about these two, they were like shadows. And I could not cross the street. Theo, you know how busy the streets are in Freetown. They're wild, right? They would not allow me to go across the street unless one was on one hand and one on the other. And that's not an exaggeration. When I would climb the stairs, if I had a knapsack or a backpack, they carried it. They just spoiled the socks off me. But anyway, they were a gift, and I love them both. Okay, what do we have next? Now, you're going to hear me talk a lot about Pastor Moses. He is the president of the Christian Reformed Church of Sierra Leone. And that's his wife and his little boy. And anyway, That's Pastor Moses. Next. The tall man on the right is John Watt. He's my dear friend. And his friend right there is Pastor Jalo. Now, next picture. This is Christiana. I'm going to talk about Christiana. She is a nurse and works for the government of Sierra Leone. And I'll talk about her in just a little bit, so you got a visual. So that's in my hotel room. She and John came for lunch. So, okay, next. Now this is at the pastor's conference where I was teaching for a week, and there's a man who just received one of the Bibles from this congregation. You gave Bibles, study Bibles, and he's one of the people who got a study Bible. Next. I took this picture because I knew you all would know what that is. I was, in the first week or so, I was in Sierra Leone, I was in Freetown, and all of a sudden I see this guy pedaling this deal. I said, stop the car, stop the car. I got out and went and talked to the guy, and I said, I know where that came from. I know. And he looks at me, you know, that came from Iowa. So anyway, I had to take that for you. Your ministry is right there, and I saw lots of those. Next. This, I will refer to the church in John Obi Village, and this is the church my friend John Waugh built. It's made out of tin, and I call it the oven. Because the windows, you can see there's 2 doors, but the windows are small, and that's where they worship. And if you get 35 people in there, you're close to the equator. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. You're about ready to cook. So that's where they've been meeting now for 4 years. Okay, next picture. This is the building we were trying to complete. This is what we saw. Well, no, it was up to the dark part, just the dark part, where you see the light-colored blocks. That was added since we got there. And the goal was to build this up, the second story, and put the roof on. Because what we were trying to do is finish that so we could have a clinic for families. We could have a clinic, a shelter for families, a clinic, medical clinic, and a church, a place to worship. So that was the physical part of what we were going to do, to complete that building. Next. There's, you know, the building, you got the walls up and so forth, putting on the roof. Next. And there it is. I think it's complete. You can see it's finished. At least the roof is finished, pardon me. There are no doors, there are no windows, there are no bars, there's no floors that have been finished. It's just, that's yet to come. Next. I'll tell you this in a little bit, but this is the first worship service in the new building. We had a day of celebration. We met in the other building, and you saw me in the video this morning reading, and I greeted you from there, and they greeted you. That was in the oven, and it was hot. And we moved from the oven that day outside. We planted 2 fruit trees in honor of 2 men, one a friend of mine from Kansas, one a friend of John's from Pennsylvania, who wanted so much to be a part of our team, but both passed away before they could come. So we planted trees outside as part of the worship service. Then we moved into this new area, and this is the downstairs in the new building. And we just gathered around. One next. This is at the clinic, and I'll tell you about the clinic, which is amazing. And I think we're taking blood pressure or something there at this time with one of the women. Next. That's it. Okay. Now, I got to tell you that this is the story. Jackson Lee came to live with me and Aaron. We took him into our house. Treated him as a son. He treated us as a parent. He got married, and he got into some trouble. And as a result, the government of the United States took away his right to be here and wanted to send him back to Liberia. He was on the deportation list. And they picked him up and they took him to York, Pennsylvania. And there they put him in detention with lots of other people. while he was there, we would talk to him at least once a week on the phone, and we could tell he was very upset, beside himself, and we believe very close to suicidal, very upset. He had left his 4 children in Austin, and he's, going to be shipped who knows where. So we were very concerned about it. So while he's there in York, Pennsylvania, God hears our prayers. And God sends a man also in confinement and detention. This man's name is John Waugh. John Waugh is here legal. But certain people in ICE had it in for John. They wanted to find fault and create issues. So 3 times they brought him back to court and confinement. It ended up being the 3rd time he came back, and the judge said, enough of this. Don't you ever bring him back here again. And the judge handed him a new green card and so forth and so on, so he never came back. But while he's there in detention, he meets Jackson. They become friends because they're both from Liberia. I believe with all my heart that God sent John Waugh there to save Jackson's life. They became fast friends. I'll never forget the day. Got a phone call from Jackson. He says, Daddy, how you doing, blah, blah, blah. He says, I got a new friend here. His name is John Waugh. Here, meet him. And I picked up the phone, and we became brothers in Jesus Christ. Very, very close friends. John and I, since that was probably in 2015, somewhere in there. Him and I have talked at least weekly, all that time. We pray together on the phone, we support each other. He involved me and Aaron in a ministry, which I'm going to tell you about. So that's how this connection begins, way back then. Now, how does the ministry of Sierra Leone begin? That John Waugh starts. John Waugh, being a Liberian, moved to Sierra Leone, forced to leave both countries because of civil war. He's a man interested in Africa. So he's here in Pennsylvania. He's watching late night, it would be early morning our time, news broadcast from Sierra Leone. On the broadcast, there's videos of a little village called Janobi. And in Janobi, the men are out of control and abusing their wives to the point of killing, murdering their wives in that community. John sees that on the TV, and he's a man of compassion. And so John says, God, what are you going to do about this? Do something. And he says, God spoke to me. And he said, I am. I'm sending you. So John Waugh, he began a ministry way back in Africa. The first thing he did when he got there, this little village is way out in nowhere. This little village, the women were making a living by breaking rocks. Sitting alongside a big pile of rocks, and they take a hammer and they just break them all day long. Take big rocks and make little rocks. And then they sell them to construction people until they make a living, sort of. The women in that little village were so poor, most of them were only partially dressed. The children were partially dressed, no shoes. Very, very poor. So John begins his ministry there. He brings containers of clothing, ships them from America. Pardon me. He ships the containers with clothing, and then some food items and so forth. And then, this is over a couple of years, and the next year he's gathering the people together. And his friend Jallo, with whom he had started a ministry 30 years ago, is helping him. And they start a church. The church, he builds that tin building. Now they got a place to worship. while John is doing this, he's realizing that we need a pastor there. So he goes to another minister of a rather large denomination, been in Sierra Leone quite a long time, and he contacts that church and says, "Could you help me with a pastor?" He said, "Sure, I can help you." So they sent a young man who was not trained, but went there. Well, it didn't work out very well because one of the things John had begun in that little community for the women who were coming to the church, he began micro businesses. You familiar with those micro businesses? You give somebody a loan, and then they start a business. They sell shoes, they sell shirts, whatever. Well, John supplied that. These women started to have micro businesses. The pastor who was assigned to come out twice a week, he was supposed to collect from the women a portion. Then he was to take that portion and was to bring it back to his, quote, I'll call it headquarters, or in my terms, his bishop. The pastor had sent him out, who was in charge of the denomination. So he's supposed to bring it back there. What happened was, he didn't bring it back. He put it in his pocket. So now, John got rid of that pastor, made sure that he was gone. The pastor in Freetown said another one. Another young man, a little bit older this time, he came out there, and I hate to say it, he did the same thing. So we have a problem. What do? That's the ministry. John says, I know what we do. We bring my friend Pastor Tom, and he will train people to be pastors who don't steal, and who can train the people in John Obi. And he can train pastors so we can start a church planting ministry. So he asked me for 3 years in a row. I think I told you that. He kept asking me, will you go? And I didn't want to go cross over to the other side for a variety of reasons. So anyway, that's how I get involved, because John wants somebody to teach pastors. So now I agree. In November, I agree. We're planning the trip and so forth. And here's how it's supposed to go. Tom is supposed to go over there and teach. He's going to teach 3 weeks solid for pastoral growth. Pastors. And then on the side, John is going to be finishing the building. Good plan. Except by the end of November, the pastor is supposed to help us find the students, quits communicating with us. This is November, approaching Christmas even. I won't say his name, but Pastor B, he's incognito. We can't find him. The phone call, emails, Facebook, anything, could not find him. Well, now, what am I going to do? I don't have anybody to teach. I got a ticket. I got Bibles, but nobody to teach. So, of course, we're praying about this. And then God says, check out the Christian Reformed Church. That's right, there's a church there somewhere named Christian Reformed. So I called our denomination. Our denomination said, oh yeah, there's a ministry there, and here's the guy who's head of it. His name is Moses Jawa. Oh, okay. Give me his number. They gave me a number, no answer. They gave me a WhatsApp number, no answer. They gave me an email, never could get a response. I was frustrated. I said to my friend John, I know we have a denominational presence there, but I can't get a hold of him. He says, what's the guy's name? I said, his name is Moses. He says, what information do you have? I said, this here, but it doesn't work. He said, okay, I'll find him. The next morning, he calls me on the phone and says, Tom, I found Moses. Here's his number, and he's waiting for you to call. Just like that. Now, one of the things you'll learn about John Wah is John Wah can find anybody, anywhere, anytime. And he will make a connection with you so that you will become his friend and his work partner. It happens all over the world. So, okay, we call Moses. Can you help us? We got a problem. He gets, we tell him the name of the pastor there who's failing us from another denomination. He says, I know of him. I've met him once or twice. He said, I'll take care of it. So next thing we know is he gets in touch with our bishop, and he puts the pressure on the bishop. You got to find some students for these people. Now, long story short, he had no students for us. He had nothing for us. He was supposed to be our sponsor. He was supposed to provide us transportation. He was supposed to provide us housing. He was supposed to provide food for all the students and for me. And John, none of it was done until Moses stepped in. And Moses got him to find some students. He was supposed to find 20 for 3 weeks. He got 20 for 1 week. Okay, we'll take it. So we started teaching. I started teaching in Aberdeen and taught these people that they brought. Some of your Bibles went there. So now you see Moses has stepped in. Moses has come to our rescue. He was not part of the plan. Not at all. Moses becomes our sponsor. Not part of the plan. Moses provides us transportation. Not part of the plan. Moses gives us a car. Moses gives us a driver. Moses gives us food. Moses says, this was just before I left, he had called and he said, I'm helping you. You need to help me. I said, what can we do for you? He says, you need to lead a pastor's conference. And I had asked for prayers. I got to teach a pastor's conference over there. And so I asked for prayers, what do I teach? And so forth and so on. So now we're there. He's helping us. He says, now, you're ready to teach. I've got all the ministers of the Christian Reformed Church and all the missionaries coming together, and we're going to meet in Kabbalah. I told you about Kabbalah this morning. So, now I have a new assignment. And I meet with all these Christian Reformed ministers from all over Sierra Leone, and I meet with them for 5 days, and I'm teaching. Amazing experience. And while there, I'm interested in what's the Christian Reformed Church doing? I got all these ministers here and so forth and so on. So it's at that point that Moses says, let me show you what the Christian Reformed Church is about. And he takes me to the building next door, and there on the wall, the banner maybe as long as that is, but half. And on there, there's 6 squares. And it says on the top, it says, rise and build. Vision, Christian Reformed Church Sierra Leone, Vision 2020 to 2030. And then there's 6 squares. And I think if I can remember them all. One square over here was, building new ministry opportunities, new churches. Next to that was poultry farm, poultry ranch. Next to that was cattle ranch. Down here, below that was radio. Next to that was mission house. Next to that was technical school. All those were the goals for 10 years for the ministry of Sierra Leone Christian Reformed Church. So I told you this morning about the radio. I said, how you doing on the radio? Well, come here, I'll show you. There's the tower. We're on 24 hours a day. And I was on the radio the next day answering call-in questions, just like you do. Amazing. Goal number 1, already achieved. Poultry ranch, what's that? Well, one of our goals as the Christian Reformed Church is to become completely self-sustaining. Every church is to become self-sustaining. How do we do that? Well, we've got to find new ways to generate income. Plug it into ministry. It's the same thing, and I'll talk about this just a little bit. It's the same thing most farmers in Iowa have to do today. Diversify. If you don't have more than one thing going on in your life, you can't support yourself. Is that not true? Do any farmers here don't have any? It's true. So, Christian Reformed Church needs to raise money. He took me, he says, I'll show you. He takes me to a place outside of town, about 16 miles out, and he says, we just bought 10 acres here. And out there in that 10 acres of land, we walk up and there's a building, a brand new house, cement block house. The pastor from the village, who's 3 miles away, he's moving in next week. He's going to pastor the church, and he's going to be a tent maker like the Apostle Paul. He's going to live here, pastor the church there, and he's going to run a poultry farm. We've ordered 300 chickens, and we're going to raise chickens. We're going to sell eggs and whatever else goes along with the poultry farm to raise funds for ministry. Then he went on to tell me, he said, we've already got the certain sales routes lined up. We've got some that are going to be in McKinney, and we've got some restaurants and things that are already way back in Freetown. They're going to buy our products, and we'll have income to do ministry. So I saw that, saw the house. I walk over here, and he says, see that there? All that footing laid in the ground there? That footing is the mission house. We're building that next. The mission house is for people like you, Tom. So when you come here, you volunteer, and you got a place to stay. We're expecting you to come and bring others with you. Then he says, see that over there? See those stakes in the ground? Can you see it? He says, that's the technical school. We're building the technical school there. We're going to teach sewing and plumbing and electricity and all those kinds of things so that people can earn a living. It's like going to the Christian school. When they come to learn a trade, they hear about Jesus Christ. We lead them to salvation, we pray. And they're provided for, and they can provide for their families. It's right there. You see it? Then he says, right over there, that's where we're going to have the Christian school. We're going to have a Christian school there. You can see it. And over there is going to be the worship center. We're going to move from in town, but we're going to move right over here. Can you see it? Yeah. That's Christian Reformed Church. A few more things about the Christian Reformed Church. When we left Kabbalah and went back home, we went toward Bow. We went to Bow. And when we're in Bow, which is a long ways away, there are a bunch of Christian Reformed churches there. And I think I only went to 3 of them there, but there's a bunch of them there. We go to the church, and there's this church which is, what can I say? It just kind of hung together. There's not much there. And we had to cross over a ditch to get to it, walk on some boards over the ditch, go into the building. It says right in the front, Bow Christian Reformed Church of such and such and so. Go inside, and I don't know, maybe it'll seat 40 people, maybe. Dirt floor. And behind the pulpit, there's a banner. And it's the same banner that Moses showed me in town. Same 6 things. And then next to it is another banner. And it says, Future Worship Center of the Bow Christian Reformed Church. And there's a picture. And the pastor said, come here. We stepped outside, crossed the little ditch again, went around the side of the building, and he says, see the hole? See all those trenches? We're going to lay the foundation right there for the worship center. I walked out, came across the little bridge again, and there was a pile of dirt. Sand, I guess it was actually. And there was probably 60 pairs of shoes on it. Shoes. I said, what in the world are those shoes doing here? He said, oh, Moses is telling me this. He said, oh, that's how the pastor supplements his income. His wife and him sell shoes so that they can sustain themselves. I went around the other side, and there's on the street all these more shoes, and they sell shoes. Tent making ministry. And then he said this. He says, we have an interesting thing happening here. As far as I know, he said, I think it's the only place in the world that does it. But on a typical month, he said, how many Sundays are there in a typical month? 4. He says, so that means you have 4 offering times, typically, unless you add. 4 said, we have all agreed, all the pastors, all the churches have agreed that 2 of those Sunday offerings stay with this church, the local church. They can use it however they want to minister. On the other 2, those other 2 Sundays, one of those Sundays, the offering goes to the denomination. And that money is used to subsidize, to give a subsidy to the pastors. So they have some income. Because the church doesn't have much income. Pardon me. The other Sunday, the pastors give their tithe. And on that tithe, I got that wrong. On the other Sunday, they give an offering. That also goes to the Christian Reformed Church denomination, and that goes for extending ministry as a denomination. The next piece is pastors all pledge that they would be tithers. They'll tithe on whatever they receive. And the tithe does not go to the church. The tithe goes to the denomination. And they have a fund. And in that fund, they collect resources so that pastors can get a loan to start a business, to be tent makers, so that they can subsidize themselves the rest of their life. That's how they're being able to do this. They all sacrifice. They all participate. They all give. It's an amazing thing. Amazing thing. So those are the things that I saw going. So anyway, I'm in Bow. I go to another church. And this one is way out, kind of like a field on the edge of town. And I go out there, and it's not a road. We just take the path, go out there, and there's a motorcycle there in front. And I go in, and I meet the pastor, and he's telling me about the church. Our church is 2 years old. We built this 2 years ago. We have around 30 to 40 people now. And he said, I'm going to show you something. We bought 2 acres out here. Kept step outside, and he points to this vacant area. He says, that's our Christian school. Can you see it? That's what he said. There's our Christian school. Can you see it? On the other side of that building, over here, there are trenches already dug in the ground. He says, that's our future worship center. I could see that. It was there. One more church in Bow we went to, and went to this church in Bow, and they had a Christian school inside the facility. And I took a lot of pictures, and there was a preschool. I bet you there were 35, 40 preschoolers in there. Wow, there's a lot of preschoolers. But it was in the sanctuary like this. Behind the pulpit was that same banner, Rise and Build. And they have a few hundred kids in the school there. This part of the facility is full of little kids. And then they have some other buildings. Amazing what the Christian Reformed Church is doing. And he said, I want to show you one more thing. One more thing. So we're back on our way back into town, and we're going to Newton. Did I say that right, Theo? Newton? Newtown? Newtown? We go to Newtown. Go way off back, away from the houses. We come, it's a dirt road and bumping along, and we turn this little bit of a bend, and there was a sign in the middle of this, on the edge of this field, big sign that says, Property of the Christian Reformed Church of Sierra Leone. It's a big sign. Next to the sign were 2 big piles. One pile of stone, construction stone, probably 10, 12 yards, a big pile. And next to that, a big pile of sand. They're building here. I went behind the sand. What do I see? I see the foundations all laid for a big building. They're all in. The rebar is all coming up, it's probably, 10 feet high already. They're going to work it up. And that's all there. And they've got all that stone laid in there that they're going to guess, what are you doing? You fill this, you put stone down before you lay your concrete floor, right? So that was all down there. There it was. I said, what are you going to do here? That's a big building. He said, well, we're going to build a mini mart. What? A mini mart? Yeah. The city is moving out here. Within 2 years, there's going to be houses and people living all over around here. We're going to be here for them. They need a place to buy some food, a place to shop. We'll have a mini mart. That'll be income for the church. Next to the mini mart, in the same building, over here is going to be a conference center. People will need a place to gather, and to meet, and to have meetings. We'll be ready for them. Upstairs, we're going to have a mission house. That's for the volunteers like you come. You can stay upstairs. Next to that is the offices. He took us outside, and he says, right over there, can you see it? There's the worship center. Can you see it? I heard that word so many times. Can you see it? Takes me for a walk around the back. Find our way through some of these plants and so on. And he says, and here's our Christian school. Can you see it? This is Sierra Leone Christian Reformed Church. Amazing. People of faith, vision, sacrifice, participating. Just, my friend John would never heard of the Christian Reformed Church before in his life until he met me. He was raised Episcopal and had problems with Episcopal Church. But anyway, he came out to Kansas last week when we were in Dispatch, Kansas. And when we concluded that day, he stood before the people of that little church and he said, I never heard of the Christian Reformed Church until I met Tom. And you people should be very, very proud of the Christian Reformed Church. What he has seen. It's amazing. And so they continue on. So now, that's a little bit about one leg. The other leg of this journey was, all this is provided by Moses. Our original guy, he tags along once in a while, but does nothing except eat. And we fed him. So now, what develops next is, I go out to teach at the conference, and I lead the conference. And while I'm there, I think it was the second night, Pastor Moses contacts me and my friend John, and he says, can we come and talk? So I have a young man here I want to introduce you to. His name is Maxwell. He's a pastor. 2.5 years ago, he came over and we met that night. He said, 2.5 years ago, Pastor Maxwell had an adulterous relationship with somebody in the church. He was immediately removed from the church. He said, and it didn't last very long, just a few weeks, and then, he went back to his wife. But he's been removed, and he's off in Freetown. That's 2.5 years ago. He would like to return to the pastoral ministry. He's done everything anybody's ever asked. The denominational board, he's met with them. They've prayed with him. He's written letters of confession, letters of repentance. He's gone to the council, the congregation of the church where he had the lapse, and that was called McKinney, and he had gone there and so forth. And he'd like to enter into the ministry again. We believe he's probably, we believe he's ready to come back. How do we do that? Can we do it? So we prayed together. And the next day, I said to him, let's do it at the end of the conference. The last thing we'll do is we will bring him into restoration in the ministry because the whole board is for it. Okay? I said, I'm going to be I was teaching out of 2 Timothy. I taught in this congregation the book of 2 Timothy. And the last message, and I think I taught this message to you when I left last summer, I think. Never bothered to look back. Paul closes his letter and he says to Timothy, come before winter. And so I taught that day, and at the end of the day, I was teaching on Come Before Winter, where Paul, the old man in prison, knowing his death is imminent, writing to a young pastor, and he's saying, come quickly, come before winter. Why? Because when winter comes, you won't be able to come, and I won't be here. I'll likely die. Come quickly, before it's too late. And so I said to the men, and all those gathered that day, before it's too late, receive your brother. Restore your brother to ministry. Pray for him. Pray over him. Restore him. And then I asked Maxwell to come forward. He stood before all his brothers and colleagues, and they had heard his confession before, but one more time he confessed, he repented, he acknowledged, he asked for forgiveness and to be restored. And so I said, brothers, all who would like to bring restoration and healing to our brother Maxwell, please come forward and pray over him. Every single person stood up and gathered around Maxwell. And they prayed. You probably saw that in the video, or yeah, it was in the video. I was standing there at one time. There was a man kneeling beside me with a pink-colored garment. That was Maxwell. And he was on his knees praying, and I had anointed him with oil. And he was restored that day. That was a highlight for me. A real highlight. But not everything was perfect that day, because there was one church that refused to attend the conference. One church said, no, we will send no delegates. We will not be present. That's the church in McKinney. The church he was serving when he had the relationship, the affair. When that affair took place, Pastor Moses replaced Maxwell with a different pastor, doing his job, caring for the church. They don't do like we do. They don't call ministers. They're assigned more like the bishop system. And he assigned a man to go there. And the church in McKinney said, no, we will not accept the one you sent. So you can sense the conflict now. The conflict is mainly between, it turns out, between the leadership of the denomination and a certain element among the elders in the church. And there's friction. Now it just so happens that before the conference, the elders of the church in McKinney had called me and said, we're not going to be there at the conference. Will you lead a weekend conference for us here in McKinney? Just our church. So now, they didn't show up. And they asked again, will you come now next week and lead a conference for us? So I talked to Moses, my brother John. What do we do? We all agreed that you can't do that. You can't do that. They are living in rebellion. They are resisting the leadership which they've agreed to endorse and follow. But they're not. They have to deal with that issue first. If they deal with that issue appropriately, then we will come and do a conference in your church. So all that was communicated to the elders in McKinney. They had a couple of meetings, and then they got back to us and said, we will invite you to come to us and help us resolve the issue with the denomination. We'll do it on such and such a Saturday. Good. So we drove all the way out to McKinney again on a Friday night. Saturday morning we had a meeting with the elders and a lot of the ministers of the Christian Reformed Church who were in the area and some of their congregational members. We had this meeting. And at this meeting, we addressed the church's behavior and resistance to the leadership of the denomination. But here's one of the most moving things for me on my journey. Maxwell was a highlight. This one here, I had told John Waugh for 3 years, I can't come, or I don't want to come, or I'm not able to come to Sierra Leone with you. I told him 3 years in a row. So now we're at this meeting in McKinney. And across the front here is the denominational lawyers here, and a couple of the denominational pastors, and here's Pastor Moses, and here's me, and another pastor, and then there's all the elders of the church. Anyway, so Pastor Moses is talking. And, this is near the beginning of that meeting, and he stands up in front of everybody and says, you know Daddy Tom. Most of you had him teach you for that week at the conference. You know him. And you know that he didn't come to Sierra Leone for 3 years. He said no to John for 3 years. And I'm telling you today, I know why he said no. So he could be here today. Today. And that just broke me up. It still does today. I had no idea I was saying no for a good reason. I probably wasn't. I know it wasn't. But God had a plan. God had a plan. I didn't say anything great. I don't think I said squat. I don't know. But God healed that church that morning. They surrendered. They prayed together. They made commitments together. And then John and I came back a week later, and we led a conference for that church, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That was God. That was God. Now, as the story continues to unfold, it just keeps unraveling. Now, we're still trying to build a building, trying to get the roof on, and all that's going on, and we're working hard, and then some guys we trusted stole, so we're losing money because they stole the wood. And sorry to say, we're running out of money. We ran out of money. We had the skeleton all up for the roof and the walls and all, and we didn't have enough money to buy the roofing material. So we had to get money. You can't leave it like that exposed. The rainy season is about to come. Well, we get money. We borrow some money and so forth, and get that started. So now the project continues. While the project is continuing, I made a request. I had heard about the mercy ships. You've heard of mercy ships? Amazing things. And I had requested, I just would love to go to a mercy ship sometime. I said it to Pastor Moses. 2 days later, he says, tomorrow morning we're going on the mercy ship. It's here in Freetown. You saw the pictures. Amazing experience. Now, when we were on the mercy ship, we met some people. And meeting these people, there's 450 volunteers who live on the ship. And we met some people, and while we're there, John, who contacts everybody, knows everybody, he says to Kofi, who's the chaplain of the ship, he says, Tom's going to have a special worship service out in John Obi Village this Sunday, whatever it was. Anyway, he says, why don't you come and join us for worship? How far is it? 50 miles, 45 miles from wherever they are. Okay, I'll come. So they came. They were an hour and a half late, but they came. And it was so hot, we had to move out and rest outside. But anyway, they came and had a wonderful experience. Well, it was that day that I found out John Waugh's history with the mercy ship. I showed you where the building, the lower half was all dark and like there's stuff growing on it from 3 years ago. That lower level was all put in by the men and people of the Mercy Ship 3 or 4 years before. John had gone to the Mercy Ship and asked for help. Now, why did John go to the Mercy Ship to ask for help? Because he had been to the Mercy Ship before and asked for help. 33 years ago, he went to the Mercy Ship. That's when he had fled into Sierra Leone. He met Mr. Jallo. John was selling flour to people to bake. Jallo had just come back from America. His father was, wanted to kill him. They got together. John began working with his wife to start the clinic. Jallo started the church. And then John asked the Mercy Ship, would you come and help us start the clinic? They came, and in 2 weeks' time, they had a complete building all set up, paid for by the Mercy Ship. So what did John do when he started a ministry in John Obi? The Mercy Ship was in town. He got them. They put down the foundation, the first walls, and all of that. And then it sat, no money. We came this year. We put the remaining walls up. Now, one of the dreams of this whole ministry is that in that new building which we were putting up, there would be a shelter for women and children. There would be a medical clinic. We hope the medical clinic could start perhaps in 25, more likely in 26. And there'd be a church. We'd transfer out of the oven into this building where there's at least a movement of air. We made the transfer out. Got that done. They meet there now every Sunday. The next thing, we got to get that building completed. We're working on it. And then a clinic. I showed you a picture of a young woman, Christiana. Now here's God again. John wakes me up and he says, Tom, I just had a dream. God told me to get a hold to find Christiana. Now who's Christiana? Christiana was a childhood neighbor of John in Liberia many years ago. Not the same age, but relatively close. They both fled because of the Civil War. They both fled to Sierra Leone. When in Sierra Leone, they bumped heads and saw each other, but then they both fled again. John knows that she's come back from America and she is somewhere in Freetown. What does he do? He finds her. The next morning, he calls me and says, Tom, I found Christiana. Guess what Christiana does? Christiana is a nurse. And Christiana works for the government. And her job, Aaron, is, I forget, public health administrator. John says to her, we have this dream of having a clinic in John Obi. There's no clinics anywhere for miles. Would you be interested in something like that? She said, I certainly would. He calls me on the phone that morning, says, we're coming over for lunch today. Came over. She says, yes, I want to be a part of that. As a matter of fact, when can we begin? Oh, we don't have the building done yet. We don't have any windows, we don't have any bars, we don't have any doors. She says, well, it doesn't matter. When can we begin? She said, how about the end of the month? I'll start at the end of the month and I'll bring 2 nurses with me. You know what? She didn't make it. It was a week late. A week later, when we had left, we left on Friday, Thursday, and on Saturday they started the clinic. She came with 2 other nurses. Now, how do you get from Freetown all the way to John Obi, 40, 45, whatever miles? You got a transportation. She didn't have a car. The other nurse didn't have a car. God sends Moses. Moses has a car. And Moses transports the nurses and their equipment. Sets up the clinic. There's Moses again. Christian Reformed Church. They had a clinic, and I remember the statistics. They called me and told me, on that day we had 63 women come through, 42 children, and 23 men. And then we ran out of supplies. We had to close it down. 2 people came in on the backs of other people. They laid them on the ground. They were so sick they couldn't walk. They had to be brought immediately to Freetown. Oh, I forgot to mention, I said she came with 2 nurses. She did, but also a doctor. These 2 people needed to be transported back to Freetown. This was serious. You can't call Uber. You look to Moses. He takes them to town. It's God. So now, the clinic has started, way ahead of schedule. The next week, 2 weeks later, they have another clinic. It's supposed to be only once a month, but the doctor says, I got to see these people again. You got to come back. So now they meet every other week. They're running out of supplies. They don't have enough supplies. Though they were able to give enough malaria medicine this past time so that the doctor said, we don't have to worry about malaria this season. We'll be all right. We've got enough. But they ran out of supplies. So we sent out a little SOS to some people and said we have a matching fund. If in the next 3 weeks, people will send a donation to the Dispatch Christian Reformed Church, somebody will match $3,000. 4,800 and something. Medication. It's just startling. So now, I'm getting toward the end of the story almost. We got this little church going. I've been preaching there. It's in the oven, and now we've moved into the building, and we need a pastor. We've tried 2 with the bishop, and they both failed. So John and I had to go to the bishop and say, I'm sorry, we can't work with you anymore because you're not supplying helpful people. We got to have a pastor. Where are we going to find a pastor? Moses, do you think you could find us a pastor? He found us one. His name was Sylvanus. He's the one we needed to buy a motorcycle for. But it turned out Sylvanus was greedy. We raised the money, the motorcycle was purchased, but Sylvanus wanted more income. And so he said to Moses, I need more income. I won't sign the contract. And Moses says, well, wait a minute. We've paid your year's rent. We give you a salary, a small salary. Now we're providing a motorcycle so you don't have to worry about that. He says, yeah, but I need more. And Moses says, I'm sorry, we don't have any more money. So the guy says, well, let me think about it. And that's when Moses called me, and he says, what do you think? I said, I don't feel good about that at all. I think the man's heart is wrong. His heart isn't where we want it to be. He said, you're right. He called Sylvanus and said, it's too late. Your heart isn't right. You will not be the pastor, church planter in John Obi. And the job you had with Youth for Christ, which is what also Moses oversees, it's literally called Alliance for Christ. He says that job is going to be given to another. So I said to Moses, can you get us another pastor? He said, give me a week. He calls, he says, I got a pastor for you. His name is Ezekiel. He's a young man I've mentored since he was in middle school. He's a wonderful young Christian man. He will pastor. He will shepherd. And he will take Sylvanus' place in Youth for Christ. And he'll spend 2 days a week at John Obi. And he will pay the salary. until we have to pay the salary. What a God, what a God. Now, we're getting closer. My friend John, he has said to me a number of times, can you see it now, Tom? Can you see it? Well, one day we were coming back from Bow, I believe, and we were driving along, and he says, all of a sudden, he says to me, he says, Tom, can you see it? I got a dream. God's given me another dream. What's it this time? He says, can't you see it? He said, we're going to plant churches all the way up the peninsula. We're going to start at John Obey, where we've got our first church. That's going to be the mother church. And that church is going to spawn other churches all the way up the coast. He says, we'll go to Black Johnson first, then we'll go to Big Whale, and then he lists, and just churches. And the mother church will be John Obey. Well, wow, what a vision. Well, I passed over something on purpose because to do church planting, you got to have a church planter. And you're going to have more than one if you're going to do a bunch of them. And they have to be properly trained. To my surprise, when we were in Kabbalah at our conference, one day Moses says to me, I'm inviting you out for dinner, you and John. So we went out for dinner. We're sitting around this table, and he introduces me to 5 men. 5 men sitting around the table. They're from a group called Multiplication Network. Multiplication Network began in Sauk Village, Illinois, 20-some years ago, by a Christian Reformed person who still runs it. Their only goal in life is to start churches. Train church planters, start churches. They do it all over the world. They, in December, planted their 10,000th church. They know what they're doing. So we sit at this table, and he introduces me. And he says, Tom, I don't remember the man's name anymore, but this man, he is the head of Multiplication Network in all of Africa. Next to him is his subordinate, who is in charge of West Africa. Next to him, here is the man who's in charge of Sierra Leone. And next to him is the one who's in charge of Freetown. Multiplication Network. They train church planters. Wow. We're going to need church planters. Okay, so that had happened earlier. Now I see why I had to be introduced to them. Because now at the end of our journey, we're talking about church planting up the whole peninsula. I get a phone call from the network person in Freetown. He says, Tom, are you ready to start with Multiplication Network in John Obey? I said, well, I'd love to, but we can't. Because by your own system, which I studied, you have to have a sponsoring pastor and a sponsoring church, and the sponsoring pastor has to be able to meet at least monthly with the training person, and there has to be a 2-year commitment minimum. I said, we don't have any of that. I can't do it. I don't have it. First of all, I don't have a sponsoring church. And then I don't have a sponsoring pastor. And then God says, well, sure you do. You got Moses. Moses, he's right there. He'll be the sponsor. His church will sponsor. Moses will be the one who will train. Can you see it all just lining up? I had nothing to do with it. Not a thing. Now, we get our money in to finish the building. We have to leave. Our plane ticket says leave on Thursday or Friday, whatever day it is. You got to leave. But the building's not done, and you don't pay for the work until it's done. We've paid in increments. And our final loan from friends came over, and now we got it, but the building won't be done until we're gone, and what do? You got to leave the money with somebody. Somebody's got to go back and check it, make sure it's done. Who can you trust with 4,000 some odd dollars? That's where it is. And who's the one we're going to entrust the $4,000 to? Pastor Moses. We give him the money. He comes back in a few days, checks the whole thing over, and pays the contractor. It's Moses again. Can you see what God has done? I had no intention of working with the Christian Reformed Church when I went over there. But it's not up to me. You think the story's done? Last Sunday, we're at a little church called Dispatch, Kansas. There's a crossroad. There's 50, 60 people there. They've been a part of this project all along. And one of the members of the church had wanted to go, but maybe we'll go next time. He was in town on Saturday, and in Dispatch, Kansas, once a year they have a storytelling festival where people come from all over America to tell stories. So his name is John. So John is there in town listening to stories. And he sits at a table with a man whose name I think is Clyde. I can't remember exactly, but anyway. And John is so excited because of what's happening in Sierra Leone, and he's sitting next to the stranger, pardon me. And he's telling him what's happening. His church is sponsoring, involved in this church, and he's all excited. And so John says to the guy, "What are you here for?" "Well, I'm here to tell stories." "Okay, tell stories." "Okay. So what do you do for a living?" He said, "Oh, I'm retired." "Well, what do you do?" He said, "I buy old hospitals." "What do you mean you buy old hospitals?" "Yeah, I buy old hospitals, me and some friends of mine, and then we take all the equipment that's in there and we refurbish it. And then we ship it around the world for missions." Come on, now that's something. Out of the blue. So he writes his name on a card and gives it to my friend John. So we're sitting Sunday afternoon after our potluck and my presentation, and it's all done. We're sitting there, and John says, "Let's call this guy. See if he's for real." We're sitting at the table. We call this man. He's back home in Wichita, Kansas. And he's for real. We talk, and he says, "What do you need?" "Oh, we're starting this clinic," and so on and so forth. He says, "Well, what do you need?" "Well, we're going to need everything." "Okay." He says, "You need hospital beds?" "Yeah, we need hospital beds, mattresses. We need urinal latrines. We need wheelchairs. We need everything. Gloves, gauze, we need it all." He said, "Okay. I'll have a shipment for you the first quarter of the new year." I said, "Wait a minute, you can't ship anything. We don't have windows, we don't have doors, we don't have bars. The thieves would have a heyday. Can't do it." He says, "Well, boy, can't you do something about that?" He said, "I'll tell you what I'll do." So you know what I can do? He said, "I'll ship you," this was last Sunday now. He said, "Next week I will ship you a pallet of supplies. It's going to be things like gloves, plastic gloves, gauze, bandages, syringes, all that kind of stuff that come in little boxes." He said, I'll send you a whole pallet so you know what I can do." "Where do I ship it?" Well, my friend John says, "Ship it to Delaware where I have my big container. I'm filling it up and it's going out in 2 weeks." And blah, blah. I said, "All right." John calls Delaware that afternoon. I'm with him. He calls Delaware and says to the guy at the shipyard, "I got a shipment coming from such and such a place, and such and such. It's going to be there sometime in the next week, whatever, and I want you to put it in my container." And the guy says, "You can do something about that. You can find a place." Well, there's no place in John Obey to store anything. I didn't say it, John Obey. I didn't say it. I said, "You can do something about it." "What am I going to do about it?" "You can secure the building." You put the iron doors on. You put the bars over the windows, add the windows, put the doors all over to secure it. And then you can put your stuff in there until you need it. That was last Sunday. The challenge is to secure the building. Secure it. The man also said, by the way, do you need a generator? Generator. There's no electricity out there. Yeah, we'll take it. But we can't take it. Why? That would go fast. Secure your building. I'll get you a generator if you secure the building. Folks, that's the story. You know, see why it takes so long? I can't do that in a sermon. I can't do it on a Sunday morning. It took longer now than I probably should have, but that's the story. And it's not finished. It's not finished. God just keeps putting something out there. And so I'm thanking you, number one. Thank you for letting me tell the story. I'm thanking you for your participation, supporting, and putting the roof on. I thank you for the Bibles that you sent. I thank you for your prayers. I thank God that I was able to tell you what your church, the denomination, has done and is doing in Sierra Leone. I am so proud to have been there. And now I'm going to say to you, I'm going to challenge you to help us secure the building. If we secure the building by mid-January or thereabouts, first quarter is what? January, February, March. He said that's when he would send it, first quarter. So we got to secure it prior to that. And then we get all this medical supplies. Oh, one other piece. John called me yesterday, texted me. He says, you know our problem with security, right? I says, yeah. He says, well, I think God might have answered that problem too once we get the building secure. He said, you know Dr. Mosa? Yeah. Well, Dr. Mosa, he said, he's a colonel something or other. He's a very high-profile military person, some high level. That's why Dr. Mosa can come out and take care of the patients, because he calls his own shots. Dr. Mosa thinks he can provide us with a military guard. That's John Roby. A military person to stand watch over that project that God has started. He didn't promise it, but he thinks he can. It just keeps going. And you're a part of it. You are a part of it. And I pray that together we can take it the next step. So if you got any questions, I really took a long time, but I hope it was worth it. You got any questions you want to ask?
Why, everybody speaks English in Sierra Leone.
Yes.
Why are all the towns named after Scottish places?
They're named after British places.
British places. Aberdeen?
Well, that's the British Isles, but that was a British colony.
What was it called before Sierra Leone?
Do
Do you know?
you know what it was called before Sierra Leone? Theo? I don't know. But it was a British colony. So you ride around and you find all these English towns. I even asked the people in Newtown, I said, do you know who you're named after? And most of the people in the church there said, no, I don't know. So I told them the story about John Newton. And then I looked it up, and sure enough, that town was named after John Newton, who had been a slave trader and wrote Amazing Grace and so forth. Yeah. English is the native language. They also speak Creole. And I can't speak Creole, but I can understand it if the people slow down. They talk really fast.
Originally named Sarah Leo, like Portuguese.
Okay, and Leo is lion,
Yes, lioness.
and
Mountains.
of the mountains. Yeah. Anyone else? So I just. Thanks again for letting me tell the story. Next week, Aaron and I will tell the story again. We'll go to Michigan. Tonight we're going to be in Oskaloosa, tell the story. And then got some storytelling to do in Pennsylvania with some people. We've been doing it in Yuma, little gatherings. But the last part, you're the first to hear. You're the first to hear. The two last parts, yeah. Father God, thank you for this time. Thank you for the support of this congregation. We count it a privilege, Lord, to serve you in this community and in this world. Receive our thanks, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. Again, thank you.